The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Survival Academy's main courtyard, where candidates from 47 different species gathered for the most important day of their training, and the air hummed with nervous energy and the clicking of countless alien languages being translated through universal communicators. Marcus Webb stood apart from the clusters of candidates, his hands resting casually in his pockets as he watched the organized chaos unfold before him. And he couldn't help but notice how every other species had arrived with enormous cargo containers that required anti-gravity sleds to move. The insectoid Vrixtal moved in precise formations, their chitinous bodies gleaming under the sun as they methodically checked their equipment manifests. And their leader Kchtara stood tallest among them with her 4 arms, gesturing commands to her subordinates, who scurried to arrange their survival packs in perfect rows. Seal of the Academy. 47 tools for 47 scenarios, representing millennia of refined survival science from across the galaxy. Near the eastern entrance, the aquatic Nuri floated in their mobile water tanks, their translucent bodies pulsing with bioluminescent concern as technicians calibrated the portable habitat systems that would keep them alive in non-aquatic environments. And Marcus watched as they tested each valve and filter 3 times over. The crystalline quarren stood like living sculptures of geometric perfection, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns as they synchronized their energy converter arrays, and soft harmonic tones emanated from them as they communicated in their musical language. Marcus looked down at his own gear, which consisted of exactly 1 item, a fixed-blade knife hanging from his belt in a worn leather sheath, and the knife itself was nothing fancy, just carbon steel with a simple wooden handle that bore the marks of heavy use and careful maintenance. "Attention all candidates!" The voice boomed across the courtyard in every language simultaneously, and a massive holographic display materialized above the crowd, showing the stern face of Challenge Master Tikal, whose amphibious features gave away nothing of his thoughts. "In 72 hours, you will be transported to Designation Kappa 7, an uncharted world classified as extreme hostile," Tikal announced, and the crowd fell silent, except for nervous chittering and bubbling. "You will have 30 standard days to survive and reach the extraction point 50 kilometers from your drop zone," he continued, his wide-set eyes scanning the assembled candidates. "And this challenge will test everything you have learned, everything your species has learned about survival in hostile environments." The holographic display shifted to show rotating images of Kappa 7. Dense jungles gave way to barren mountains, cut through rocky canyons, and storm systems swirled across continents with frightening intensity. "Each team will be assigned a biome sector," Tikal said, "and you may bring only your assigned survival pack, and whatever knowledge you carry in your minds. And remember that the Academy provides the tools, but survival depends on you." Marcus felt eyes turning toward him, and whispers began to spread through the crowd like ripples across water. "Is that the human?" a translated voice asked. "He has no pack," another observed. "Just a primitive blade," a third voice added, with what sounded like amusement. Katara's antenna twitched as she noticed the human standing alone, and she moved toward him with purpose, her clawed feet clicking against the stone courtyard, and her translator crackled to life. "Human candidate," she said, her compound eyes fixed on Marcus. "Where is your survival pack? Where are your tools?" Marcus met her gaze calmly and gestured to the knife at his belt. "Right here," he said simply. Katara's antenna flattened against her head in what Marcus recognized as confusion or irritation. "That is inadequate," she stated. "The manifest requires 47 standard survival implements, and you have brought exactly 1, and that one appears to be nothing more than a sharpened metal wedge." "It's all I need," Marcus replied. The conversation had drawn attention now, and candidates from a dozen species gathered around to witness the exchange. and their translators created a cacophony of overlapping voices expressing shock and disbelief. "Impossible," a Quarren chimed, their harmonic voice carrying clearly. "Thermal regulation alone requires 3 separate devices, and water purification demands specialized filtration systems that cannot be replicated with primitive tools." Burbled from their tank. "This is irresponsible," Katara insisted, turning to address the crowd. "Humans may have recently joined the galactic community, but surely they understand basic survival protocol. This candidate is either ignorant or suicidal, and either way he represents a danger to any team he joins." Marcus remained quiet, his expression neutral, but his eyes held something that few of the aliens recognized: complete confidence, born from experience. "He should be disqualified," Katara announced, "for his own safety and the safety of others." "That will not happen." Tikal's voice cut through the chatter, and the challenge master himself emerged from the administrative building, his webbed feet leaving damp prints on the stone. "Candidate Webb has met all Academy requirements, and his species has chosen to interpret the Survival Pact provision in their own way." "But Master," Katara protested, "he has no water purification system, no shelter fabricator, no thermal regulation." "No, he has a knife," Tikal interrupted, and something like amusement flickered in his ancient eyes. "And I am curious to see what he does with it, because in my 300 years as Challenge Master, I have learned that different species approach survival in very different ways." The crowd murmured with uncertainty, and Katara's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Master, if I may request," she began. "Request denied," Thakol said firmly. "Candidate Webb will participate, and since you have expressed such concern for his welfare, Katara, I am assigning him to your team in Sector 7. Katara's entire body went rigid with displeasure. But Academy protocol demanded obedience to the Challenge Master, and she could only bow in acceptance. "As you command," she said stiffly. Thakol's gaze swept across the assembled candidates one final time. "You have 72 hours to prepare yourselves mentally and physically," he announced. "Study your biome assignments, review your equipment protocols, and remember that the challenge is designed to push you to your absolute limits, and some of you will fail. But failure here means only embarrassment rather than death, so consider yourselves fortunate." The holographic display vanished, and Tikal departed, leaving the candidates to their preparations and their gossip. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus noticed several candidates pointing at him and making gestures that clearly conveyed pity or mockery, and the Vrixtal team members that would accompany him and Katara into Sector 7 regarded him with what could only be described as dread. One young Vrixtal approached him hesitantly, her antennae quivering. "Human Marcus," she said quietly, "I am Siltra, and I will be on your team, and I must ask, do you truly believe you can survive with only that blade?" Marcus looked at the young alien and saw genuine concern rather than mockery in her compound eyes. "I've survived worse with less," he told her honestly, "and besides, I didn't bring just a knife." "No?" Siltra's confusion was evident. "What else do you have?"
"Carry." Marcus tapped his temple with one finger.
"Everything my grandfather taught me. Everything his grandfather taught him, going back thousands of years," he said. "And that's something that doesn't need batteries or replacement parts." Siltra didn't seem reassured, but she bowed politely and returned to her team. Marcus watched the aliens continue their elaborate preparations, checking and rechecking equipment that probably cost more than a small starship. And he pulled his knife from its sheath to examine the blade in the sunlight. The steel was clean and sharp, the edge perfect from hours of careful honing. And along the spine of the blade were tiny scratches and marks that told stories of 100 past uses. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "A knife isn't a tool, boy. It's the tool that makes all other tools, and a man who knows how to use one properly can survive anywhere." Marcus slid the knife back into its sheath, smiled slightly. "Guess we'll find out, old man," he murmured to himself, and then he walked toward the barracks to rest before the challenge began, while behind him the other candidates continued to fuss over their 47 carefully catalogued implements. The human was ready. The dropship shuddered as it entered Kappa 7's atmosphere, and through the viewport, Marcus could see the dense jungle canopy that would be their home for the next 30 days. And mountains rose in the distance like jagged teeth against the purple-tinted sky. Katara stood at the front of their compartment, reviewing holographic displays that showed terrain maps and environmental data, while her 3 team members, Siltra, Vexrim, and Koltar, secured their enormous equipment packs with practiced efficiency. "Attention Team 7, Katara announced, her mandibles clicking with authority. "Touchdown in 60 seconds, and we establish base camp immediately upon landing, according to standard protocol. And Candidate Webb." She turned to look at Marcus, who sat calmly with his hands resting on his knees and his knife at his belt. "Try not to die on the first day," she finished coldly. "I'll do my best," Marcus replied, without taking offense. Ship touched down with a gentle thud, and the rear ramp descended to reveal a wall of humid air and unfamiliar sounds, and the jungle beyond pulsed with alien life that clicked and buzzed and screamed. The Vrixtal team moved out in formation, their anti-grav sleds carrying hundreds of kilograms of equipment, and monitoring drones detached from the dropship to follow them and record everything for the Academy's evaluation. Marcus stepped onto the soft jungle floor last, his boots sinking slightly into the moss, and he immediately began observing everything around him with intense focus. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than houses, and their canopies so thick that only scattered beams of sunlight penetrated to the ground, and vines hung everywhere like natural rope, and the air smelled of decomposition and growth happening simultaneously. "Siltra, begin atmospheric analysis," Katara commanded. "Vexrim, activate the shelter fabricator. Koltar, establish the perimeter sensors." The 3 Vrixtal moved with military precision, deploying devices that hummed and beeped and projected holographic interfaces, and Marcus watched them work while he knelt to examine the soil. The dirt here was dark and rich, which meant good drainage and probably indicated running water nearby. He rubbed some between his fingers and brought it close to his nose to smell it. "What are you doing?" Siltra asked, her antenna twitching with curiosity. "Learning," Marcus said simply, and he stood and walked toward a cluster of plants with broad leaves. He touched one leaf carefully, noting how water beaded on its surface. Then he turned it over to see the underside, and he pulled his knife from its sheath and made a small cut in the stem. Clear sap oozed out. Marcus touched it with one finger and rubbed it to test the consistency. "Waterproof resin," he noted quietly to himself. "Useful. The atmospheric analysis is complete," Siltra called out. "Oxygen content is 17%, which is tolerable for most species, but will cause fatigue for humans after extended exertion." "Temperature is dropping," Vexrim reported from his monitoring station. "Current reading is 23 degrees standard, but projections show it will fall to 8 degrees after sunset." "Activate thermal regulation units," Katara ordered, "and deploy the shelter dome." A device the size of a small vehicle began to unfold with mechanical precision, creating a transparent dome that would protect them from the elements, and heating units arranged themselves around the perimeter. Marcus watched the sun's position through the canopy gaps, and noted which direction it was moving, and he could already tell that night would come fast on this world. "Human Marcus," Katara said, "you should set up your shelter now, before darkness falls." Marcus replied, and he walked toward a cluster of young trees that grew close together. He selected 4 that formed a rough square about 3 meters apart, and he used his knife to cut down several dozen long, straight branches from the surrounding underbrush. And then he began lashing them together with vines that he had gathered. The Vrixtal watched with confusion as Marcus worked, his movements quick and efficient, and within 30 minutes, he had constructed a basic lean-to frame.
"That won't protect you from the cold," Koltar observed.
"Not done yet," Marcus said, and he began gathering broad leaves and layering them across the frame in overlapping rows like shingles on a roof. The leaves he had chosen were the same ones with the waterproof coating, and he arranged them so water would run off rather than soak through. And he packed the inside with dry plant matter for insulation. By the time he finished, the sun was touching the horizon. Shelter looked primitive compared to the Vrixtal dome, but it was sturdy and well constructed. "You built that with just your knife?" Siltra asked. "And materials the forest provided," Marcus added. "The knife just helped me harvest them." Night fell like a curtain being drawn, and the temperature plummeted even faster than Vexrim's instruments had predicted, and frost began forming on the ground. Inside their dome, the Vrixtal activated their thermal units, and warm orange light glowed from their camp, and Marcus could see them moving about in comfort. He gathered stones from the area and arranged them in a circle, then collected specific types of dead wood, some for kindling, some for sustained burning, and he used his knife to shave fine curls from a piece of dry wood. Then he found a piece of flint among the stones and struck it against his knife's spine, and sparks flew into the tinder, and within minutes, a small fire crackled to life. Marcus fed it carefully, building it up until he had a good blaze going, and then he positioned flat stones around it to reflect heat toward his shelter. The Vrixtal had stopped their camp activities and were watching him through their dome. "Primitive fire," Katara observed to her team, "inefficient and dangerous." But Marcus was warm, and his fire had cost him nothing but knowledge and effort. The next morning arrived with thick fog that clung to everything, and Marcus woke to the sound of Katara shouting orders. "The water purification unit is malfunctioning," she announced with barely controlled frustration. "Vexrim, run a diagnostic immediately." "The humidity has corroded the filter connections," Vexrim reported. "I can repair it, but it will take 4 hours, and we need water now because our reserves are already low." Marcus emerged from his shelter and stretched, and the fire had burned down to coals, but his camp was still warm. "There's water nearby," he said. "How could you possibly know that?" Katara demanded. "Listen," Marcus said. The Vrixtal went silent, and after a moment they could hear it, a faint rushing sound in the distance. "Running water," Marcus confirmed, "probably about half a kilometer that direction," and he pointed through the trees. "Even if that's true, we cannot drink from an unknown source without purification," Katara stated firmly. "Academy protocols." "I'll be back in an hour," Marcus interrupted, and he grabbed a large leaf and folded it into a cup shape, and then he walked into the jungle before Katara could object. Siltra followed him, her curiosity overcoming her caution. The stream was exactly where Marcus had predicted, clear water flowing over smooth stones, and he knelt beside it and studied the water carefully. "We cannot drink this," Siltra said nervously. "Not yet," Marcus agreed. Gathering materials, long hollow reeds, sand from the stream bed, small stones, and charcoal from a burned tree stump. He used his knife to cut sections of bamboo-like plant, and he arranged them vertically, and then he layered sand, charcoal, and small stones inside them. "This is a filter," he explained to Siltra. "The water passes through the charcoal, which removes impurities, then through the sand, which catches particles, and the stones provide structure." He poured stream water into the top of his makeshift filter, and it trickled through the layers and emerged clear into his leaf cup. "But is it safe?" Siltra asked. Marcus pulled out his knife and held the blade over his fire to sterilize it, then made a small cut on his thumb, and he let a drop of his blood fall into the filtered water. "If there are dangerous microorganisms, they'll attack my blood cells, and I'll see them multiply," he explained. "But if the water is clean, nothing will." They waited, And nothing happened. Now we boil it to be absolutely sure, Marcus said, and he filled a section of bamboo with the filtered water and placed it carefully in the coals of his fire. Within minutes, the water was bubbling, and he let it cool before drinking. Your equipment is faster, Marcus admitted to Siltra, but mine doesn't break, and I can make more filters whenever I need them. When they returned to camp, Kashtara was still waiting for her purification unit to be repaired, and Marcus handed her a bamboo container full of clean water. It's boiled and filtered, he said. Drink it or don't, but you should stay hydrated. Kashtara looked at the primitive container, then at Marcus, and her pride warred with her thirst. Finally she drank, and the water was clean and cold. Acceptable, she said stiffly. Over the next week, similar patterns emerged, and the Vrixtal faced one technical difficulty after another. As the humid jungle environment corroded and clogged their sophisticated equipment, Marcus continued to work with his knife and his knowledge, and he was always comfortable, always fed, always prepared. And Kashtara was starting to wonder if perhaps she had underestimated what humans could do with almost nothing. The morning of day 8 began with an unnatural stillness that made Marcus uneasy, and the usual jungle sounds had fallen silent, and even the insects had stopped their constant buzzing. Something's wrong, Marcus said quietly as he examined the sky through the canopy. Your primitive instincts are showing, Katara replied dismissively, though her antennae twitched with barely perceptible nervousness. Our sensors show no abnormal readings. Siltra was monitoring a holographic display when it flickered once, then twice, and then went completely dark. That's strange, she said, tapping the interface. The power cell should last for weeks, but... A massive crack of thunder split the air, and the sky above the jungle turned an angry purple-black, and lightning arced between the clouds in patterns that looked almost alive. Electromagnetic storm, Vexrim shouted as his equipment began sparking. Everyone get away from the electronic devices. But it was too late, and the storm unleashed a wave of electromagnetic energy that swept across the jungle like an invisible tsunami, and every piece of electronic equipment simultaneously died with small pops and hisses of burning circuits. The shelter dome collapsed as its framework lost power, and thermal units went dark, and communication devices sparked and melted, and data displays shattered, and monitoring drones fell from the sky like dead birds. Katara's team stood in shocked silence as 47 carefully maintained survival tools became 47 useless pieces of metal and plastic. No, 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 Vexrim cried, frantically checking his devices one by one. Everything's fried. The circuits are completely burned out. This will take days to repair, maybe weeks. The food synthesizer is dead, Koltar reported with rising panic. And our nutrient stores were kept in temperature-controlled containers that no longer function. And without refrigeration, the food will spoil within hours. Siltra's voice was barely a whisper as she stared at her ruined equipment. How will we survive? She asked. Candidate Webb, Kashtara said, turning to face Marcus. And for the first time, her voice carried no mockery or dismissal, only naked concern. Your knife still works, Marcus confirmed, holding up the blade that was completely unaffected by the electromagnetic pulse. And that's what we're going to rely on now. Rain began falling in heavy sheets, and without their shelter dome, the Vrixtal were exposed to the elements, and their chitinous bodies were not designed for prolonged exposure to cold and wet conditions. Here's what we're going to do, Marcus said with calm authority, and nobody objected. Siltra, you're going to help me build proper shelters for everyone, and Vexrim, you'll gather firewood. I'll show you which types burn best. And Koltar, you're on water detail. And Katara, I need you to start sorting through your equipment to see what can be salvaged for other purposes. You want me to dismantle Academy-issued survival equipment? Katara asked. It's not survival equipment anymore, Marcus said bluntly. It's raw materials, and we need to think of it that way if we're going to make it through this. The storm raged for 3 days straight, and during that time Marcus worked tirelessly to teach the Vrixtal how to survive without technology. He showed them how to build A-frame shelters using the same techniques he had used for his own, but larger and reinforced with support poles, and he demonstrated how to weave walls from branches and leaves to block the wind. The key is overlapping everything, he said, explained to Siltra as they worked. Water always flows downward, so if each layer overlaps the one below it, the rain will run off instead of soaking through. By the end of the first day, all 5 team members had weatherproof shelters, and Marcus had established a large communal fire under a natural rock overhang that protected it from the rain. Fire is life out here, Marcus told them as they huddled around the flames. It provides warmth and light, it purifies water and cooks food, it keeps predators away and signals for help, and most importantly, it gives you hope when everything else seems dark. On the second day, Marcus taught them about food. The forest is full of calories if you know where to look, he said, using his knife to dig up roots from the muddy ground. These tubers are starchy and nutritious when cooked. He showed them how to identify edible plants versus poisonous ones, how to set snares for small animals using cordage he made from bark fibers, how to fish in the swollen stream using hooks carved from bone and line braided from plant materials. Watch the animals, he advised. If birds eat a berry, it's probably safe for us too. And if insects avoid a plant completely, there's usually a good reason. Vexrim proved to be a quick learner, and soon he was helping Marcus construct more elaborate tools. This is a bow drill, Marcus explained, demonstrating how to create friction fire without flint. You spin this spindle against this board, and the friction generates enough heat to create an ember. Fascinating, Vexrim said, his scientific mind engaging with the mechanical principles. It's essentially converting kinetic energy into thermal energy through friction, and the same physics that powers our fusion reactors, just on a much smaller scale. Exactly, Marcus agreed, pleased. Your people have the knowledge of physics. You just forgot how to apply it without computers. On the third day, tragedy nearly struck when Koltar stumbled through some plants and emerged covered in an angry red rash that spread rapidly across his carapace. It burns, he cried. The toxin is absorbing through my exoskeleton. Marcus quickly examined the plants Koltar had touched, then rushed into the jungle with his knife. He returned minutes later with an armful of different plants, and he crushed them together with a stone, mixing their juices into a thick paste. This plant is the antidote, Marcus explained, as he applied the paste to Koltar's affected areas. It grows near the poison plant, because they have a symbiotic relationship in the soil, and indigenous peoples on Earth learned long ago that nature often provides the cure close to the danger. Within an hour, Koltar's rash had faded, and he looked at Marcus with newfound respect. You saved my life with plants and a knife, he said quietly. With knowledge, Marcus corrected. The knife just helped me harvest the plants. That night, as the storm finally began to clear, the team sat around their fire, and the mood had shifted completely from the beginning of the challenge. I don't understand, Katara admitted, staring into the flames. We are the advanced species. We have technology that can cross galaxies. We have equipment designed by the best engineers in known space. And yet, when that equipment failed, we were helpless. And you, with your primitive blade, were not. Marcus carved a piece of wood idly as he spoke. Technology is wonderful, he said, and I'm not saying we should abandon it. But humans learned a long time ago that we need to remember the basics. Because technology fails, and batteries die, and machines break, but knowledge and skills last forever. Your people still teach these primitive skills? Siltra asked, even though you have advanced technology too? Especially. Because we have advanced technology, Marcus replied, we never want to forget how we survived before we had machines to do it for us. And every human child learns basic survival skills the same way I learned from my grandfather, and he learned from his grandfather, going back thousands of years. He held up the knife and turned it so the firelight danced along the blade. This isn't just a tool, Marcus said. It's a symbol of human adaptability. And with this, I can make an axe. And with an axe, I can build a shelter. And with shelter, I can survive. And with survival, I can start to rebuild civilization if I had to. Vexrim looked at his pile of ruined electronic equipment with new understanding. We brought 47 specialized tools, he said slowly, but none of us knew how to use all of them. And we each specialized in different equipment, and we depended on the tools to do the thinking for us. Whereas the human brought one general tool and all the knowledge needed to use it. Katara finished, and her mandibles clicked with what might have been resignation, or perhaps respect. Tomorrow we still have 3 weeks left in this challenge, Marcus said, standing and stretching, and eventually some of your equipment will come back online. But until then, we survive the old way. And maybe by the end, you'll realize that the old way still has value, even when the new way is available. As the Vrixtal settled into their handmade shelters for the night, warm and dry and fed, despite having no working technology, they began to understand why the Challenge Master had allowed the human to participate with only a knife. It wasn't about the tool itself, but about what the tool represented, the accumulated wisdom of a species that had clawed its way up from nothing and never forgotten the lessons learned along the way. And that knowledge was worth more than all the advanced technology in the galaxy. By day 18, the team had established a rhythm that felt almost natural, and some of the Vrixtal equipment had slowly come back online as the electromagnetic interference faded. But none of them rushed to dismantle the shelters Marcus had taught them to build, or to extinguish the fires they had learned to maintain. The evening sky burned orange and purple as the sun set behind the mountains, and the 5 team members sat around their communal fire, sharing a meal of roasted tubers and smoked fish that Marcus had taught them to preserve using nothing but smoke and patience. Katara watched Marcus as he worked on a new project, using his knife to carefully shape a piece of wood into what looked like a handle of some kind. And her curiosity finally overcame her pride. Marcus, she said, and it was the first time she had used his personal name without the formal candidate title. I have been thinking about something for days now, and I need to understand. Ask, Marcus replied without looking up from his carving. Why do humans approach survival so differently from every other species? Katara asked, gesturing at the primitive camp around them that had somehow become more comfortable than their original high-tech setup. The Vrixtal evolved on a world with stable climate and abundant resources, so we developed specialization and efficiency. And the Nuri evolved in a perfect aquatic environment, and the Quarren formed in crystal caves with consistent conditions. But humans— She paused, searching for words. What made your people this way? She finished. Marcus set down his carving and looked at the fire, and the flames reflected in his eyes as he considered his answer. Earth tried to kill us, he said simply. Not metaphorically, but literally. From the moment our ancestors became aware they were alive, the planet tested them in every possible way. The Vrixtal leaned closer, antennae focused intently on Marcus. Go on, Siltra encouraged. Humans didn't evolve with natural weapons, Marcus explained, holding up his hands. No claws or fangs or venom or armor, and we weren't particularly strong or fast compared to the predators that hunted us. And we couldn't breathe underwater, or fly, or burrow into the ground to escape danger. Then how did you survive? Vexrim asked. We learned, Marcus said, and we adapted, and we made tools to compensate for everything nature hadn't given us. And when we mastered one environment, we moved to another that was completely different, and learned to master that too. He picked up a stick and began drawing in the dirt beside the fire. Humans spread across Earth and encountered every kind of environment you can imagine, he continued, sketching rough maps. frozen tundra, where temperatures dropped so low that exposed skin would die in minutes, and scorching deserts, where water was more precious than gold, and dense jungles where everything was either poisonous or trying to eat you, and high mountains where the air was too thin to breathe, and we learned to survive in all of them. That should be impossible, Koltar observed. Most species can only thrive in environments similar to their evolutionary origin. Humans are generalists, Marcus explained. We gave up specialization for adaptability, and instead of evolving specific traits for specific environments, we evolved the ability to learn and innovate and pass that knowledge to the next generation. He pulled his knife from its sheath and held it up so the firelight gleamed along the blade. This is why the knife is so important to humans, Marcus said, because it's not really a tool, it's a tool maker, and watch what I can do with just this one implement. Over the next hour, Marcus demonstrated the incredible versatility of the simple blade. He used the knife to cut cordage, and with the cordage, he lashed together a basic axe head using a sharp stone. The knife makes an axe, he said, and then he used the axe to fell a small tree. With the tree, he began constructing a frame. The axe makes shelter, he continued, building rapidly. He used the knife to carve wooden pegs and to split wood and to notch joints. Shelter makes survival possible, Marcus said, as the structure took shape. Then he used the knife to fashion a bow and arrow, and he hunted a small animal, and he used the knife to clean and prepare the meat. Survival makes civilization possible, he finished, because once you can survive, you can start thinking about building something permanent. The Vrixtal watched in amazement as Marcus continued demonstrating, using the knife as a drill by spinning it rapidly, using it to scrape bark for tinder, using the spine to strike sparks, using it to dig and pry and hammer and saw. Different tools, depending on how you hold it, and what angle you use it at, Marcus explained. And more importantly, a knife can create entirely new tools, and those tools can create more tools, and eventually you have everything you need. Remarkable, Vexrim breathed, his scientific mind clearly racing. We brought 47 specialized tools, each designed for one specific purpose, but you brought one generalized tool that can be adapted for unlimited purposes. And there's something else, Marcus added, pulling out a piece of flint from his pocket. I can also make a knife, if I lose this one. He demonstrated the basics of stone knapping, striking the flint carefully with another stone to create sharp flakes. Our ancestors made knives like this for hundreds of thousands of years before they learned to work metal, Marcus said, showing them a razor-sharp stone blade he had created in minutes. And the knowledge never went away because we kept teaching it, generation after generation. Ktara's antennae drooped as understanding dawned. I brought 47 tools, she said quietly, but I only knew how to operate perhaps 10 of them, and Siltra knew different ones, and Vexrim knew others still, and none of us individually possessed the knowledge to use all of our equipment. Whereas Marcus knows how to use his one tool in 47 different ways, Siltra added, and probably more ways we haven't even seen yet. Specialization has value, Marcus acknowledged, and I'm not saying the Vrixtal approach is wrong, but humans learned that if you specialize too much, you become fragile, and when conditions change or equipment fails, specialists are helpless, but generalists adapt. Your people still practice these primitive skills, even though you have advanced technology? Koltar asked. Why maintain knowledge that seems obsolete? Because it's not obsolete, Marcus replied firmly. Technology is built on these fundamentals. And if you forget the fundamentals, your technology becomes magic instead of science. And when magic fails, you have nothing left. He gestured at their camp, the handmade shelters, the carefully maintained fire, the tools crafted from natural materials. Every human child learns to start a fire without matches, Marcus continued, and to purify water without filters, and to navigate without GPS. and to build shelter without prefabricated materials, and not because we expect technology to fail, but because we never want to be helpless if it does. It's a cultural memory, Vexrim said slowly, working through the concept. You're maintaining the knowledge of how your species survived before technology, treating it as precious as any scientific discovery. More precious, Marcus corrected, because scientific discoveries can be recorded in databases and recovered later. But survival skills require practice and muscle memory and intuition. That can only be passed from teacher to student, hand to hand, generation to generation. The fire crackled and popped as they sat in silence, and the monitoring drones that had reactivated earlier circled overhead, recording everything for the Academy. When we return, Kchtara said finally, I will recommend that the Academy revises its survival curriculum to include these human techniques, because clearly we have been teaching equipment operation when we should have been teaching fundamental principles. I'd be happy to help, Marcus offered, though I should warn you that it takes years to really master these skills, and you can't learn them from a computer program or a holographic manual. How did you learn them? Siltra asked. Marcus smiled and pulled out a small photograph he kept wrapped in waterproof material. It showed an old human man and a young boy working together to build a fire. My grandfather taught me everything he knew, said softly, and his grandfather taught him, and his grandfather taught him, going back further than we can trace. And someday, if I'm lucky, I'll teach these same skills to my own grandchildren. Humans terrify me, Kchtara admitted, but there was no fear in her voice, only deep respect. Not because you're warriors, but because you're survivors. And a species that can thrive with almost nothing is far more dangerous than a species that needs everything. Marcus returned the photograph to its protective wrapping. The knife isn't what makes humans dangerous, he said. The knife is just a piece of metal. And what makes us dangerous is the knowledge of how to use that piece of metal to build an entire civilization from scratch if we had to. And you never forget that knowledge, Vexrim added. Never, Marcus confirmed, because humans remember where we came from, and we remember what it cost to get here. Day 25 dawned with an announcement that crackled through the newly repaired communication devices. And Challenge Master Thakol's voice carried across all team channels simultaneously with grave authority. Attention all candidates, he declared. The final challenge begins now, and you must reach the extraction point 50 kilometers from your current position within 5 days. And the terrain between you and extraction includes canyons, rivers, dense forest, and mountainous regions, and you may bring only what you can carry. The communication ended, and Team 7 stood looking at their accumulated equipment, the original 47 tools, plus everything they had created over the past weeks. We need to prioritize, Kchtara said, surveying the gear with strategic focus. The anti-grav sleds are functioning again, so we can transport the essential equipment. How much does all your original gear weigh? Marcus asked. Datapad, quickly. Approximately 400 kilograms, he reported. Plus the sleds themselves add another 60 kilograms. That's too much, Marcus said flatly. We'll be crossing rough terrain and possibly climbing, and anything that slows us down is dangerous. These tools are Academy issued, Kchtara protested. We cannot simply abandon them. Then you'll never make it, Marcus replied, and he began gathering his own meager possessions, his knife, a small bundle of cordage he had made, and a fire-starting kit. I'm traveling light, and I'll see you at extraction if you survive the journey. Koltar looked at the massive pile of equipment, then at Marcus's tiny pack. He has a point, Koltar said quietly. We've relied on that human skills more than our equipment for weeks now, and if we're moving fast through dangerous territory, we need to be mobile. After an hour of debate, Team 7 made the difficult decision to take only essential items, communication devices, medical supplies, navigation tools, and water purification systems, and everything else was cached for later recovery. Even with the reduced load, the Vrixtal carried far more than Marcus, and as they began their trek through the jungle, the difference became immediately apparent. Marcus moved through the forest like water flowing around obstacles, his movements efficient and his breathing steady, while the Vrixtal struggled with their packs, even though the anti-grav sleds bore most of the weight. The sleds work on level ground, Siltra panted as they climbed a steep slope, but they're useless on inclines, and we're carrying all this weight ourselves now. By noon of the first day, they reached the canyon system that Marcus had spotted on the terrain maps, and a river churned far below through a narrow gorge with steep walls. "We need to descend and cross at the shallowest point," Kixtara said, consulting her map. Navigation display. They found a path down, but halfway to the river bottom, the sky darkened ominously. "Weather satellite is showing a massive storm system approaching," Vexrim reported with alarm. "Flash flood conditions are likely." "We need to cross now," Marcus urged, "before the water rises." They scrambled down the remaining slope and reached the river's edge just as the first raindrops fell, and the water was already running fast and high. "The current is too strong," Koltar said, testing the water with one foot. "We'll be swept away." "Link together with rope," Marcus commanded, pulling out the cordage he had brought. "I'll anchor us." But even as they prepared to cross, the storm unleashed its full fury, and rain hammered down in blinding sheets. Water began pouring down the canyon walls from 100 different sources, and the river swelled before their eyes, rising a meter in minutes. "We're trapped," Siltra cried. "We're not," Marcus said, and he pointed at the canyon wall where a narrow ledge ran along the rock face, about 5 meters above the current water level. "We climb." "Our equipment is too heavy," Kitara realized with horror. "The anti-grav sleds are waterlogged and failing." "Then drop them," Marcus said. "But drop them or drown," Marcus shouted over the roar of rushing water. "Choose now." One by one, the Vrixtal made the agonizing decision to abandon their remaining equipment, and Marcus used his knife to cut handholds in the softer rock, and he secured ropes to create safety lines. The team inched along the ledge as floodwaters raged below them, and 47 specialized survival tools vanished into the torrent, but 5 living beings continued forward. They climbed for hours as the flood raged, and finally they reached high ground and collapsed in exhaustion. "We lost everything," Kitara said numbly, staring at her empty hands. "P. You're alive," Marcus replied. "That's not nothing." That night, huddled in a cave Marcus had found, the team ate berries and roots that Marcus identified as edible, and they warmed themselves by a fire he started, using his knife and flint. "I understand now," Vexrim said quietly, "why you only brought the knife, because you knew that equipment could be lost or destroyed, but knowledge and skills remain. Plus the knife can create everything else we need," Marcus added, and he used the blade to fashion crude tools from stone and wood, making cutting implements for everyone. Day 27 found them traversing a high mountain pass, and rockslide warnings kept appearing on the surviving navigation device until its battery finally died. Then the rockslide came, and tons of stone tumbled down the mountainside, and the team scattered to avoid being crushed. When the dust settled, they discovered the Quarren member of another team, trapped beneath a boulder, their crystalline body pinned and cracking under the pressure. "We need to lift this," Marcus assessed quickly, examining the situation. "Impossible," the Quarren gasped. "It weighs several tons, and without hydraulic equipment." "We use leverage," Marcus interrupted, and he used his knife to quickly fashion a sturdy pole from a fallen tree trunk. He wedged the pole under the boulder and found a fulcrum point using a smaller rock. "Everyone on the pole," Marcus ordered. "When I count to 3, we all push down with everything we have." The combined strength of the team, plus the mechanical advantage of the lever, shifted the massive boulder just enough, and the Quarren pulled themselves free.
"You saved my life with a stick," the Quarren said in amazement.
"I saved your life with physics," Marcus corrected with a slight smile, "and the knife just helped me cut the stick." The final stretch took them through a flooded swamp, and the water was waist-deep and filled with hidden dangers. "Our feet will rot if we stay in this water too long," Koltar warned, "and we have no waterproof equipment left." Marcus searched the swamp vegetation and found reeds growing in thick clusters, and he used his knife to harvest them and demonstrated how to bundle them into floating platforms. "We make rafts," he explained, quickly weaving the reeds together and waterproofing the bundles with sap he collected from specific trees. Within hours, the team floated across the swamp on their handmade rafts, staying dry and moving faster than they could have walked. On day 30, exhausted and carrying nothing but the knowledge Marcus had shared with them, Team 7 reached the extraction point. Challenge Master Thol stood waiting beside the transport ships, his ancient eyes studying each team as they arrived. Most teams limped in, burdened by whatever equipment they had managed to salvage, looking haunted by their experiences. Marcus walked in last, his knife still at his belt, looking tired but unbroken. Thakal reviewed the monitoring drone footage privately, then addressed all the candidates in the debriefing hall. "I have evaluated every candidate's performance," he announced, "and the results are enlightening, and candidate Marcus Webb has achieved the highest survival adaptability score in Academy history." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Katara stood and addressed the assembly. "I began this challenge believing the 47 tools represented the pinnacle of survival preparation," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "and I mocked the human for bringing only one, and I was wrong, and Marcus Webb taught us that tools serve those who don't need them, because when you truly understand survival, you can create what you need from what you find." "The lesson here," Thakal added, "is that all species must remember their fundamentals, and technology is wonderful, but knowledge is eternal, and Candidate Webb represents a philosophy that the Academy has neglected, the philosophy of adaptability over specialization." After the ceremony, Thakal approached Marcus privately. "The Academy wishes to offer you an instructor position," he said, "to teach what you call primitive skills to future candidates from all species." Marcus considered the offer carefully. "I'll accept on one condition," he said, "that you understand these aren't primitive skills, and they're fundamental skills, and there's nothing primitive about knowledge that has kept humans alive for hundreds of thousands of years." "Agreed," Thakal said, "and perhaps you can teach this old amphibian a few things as well." Later Katara found Marcus examining his knife in the evening light, and she sat beside him in comfortable silence. "I've been writing in my personal journal," she said finally. "Share something with you." Marcus nodded for her to continue. "Humans are terrifying," she read from her datapad, "not because they're warriors, but because they're survivors. And give them nothing but a sharp edge and time, and they'll build everything else. And that makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy." Marcus smiled and slid his knife back into its sheath. "Dangerous?" he repeated. "Maybe, but I prefer to think of us as persistent." "Same thing," Katara replied, and for the first time, Marcus heard what might have been laughter in her clicking mandibles. Above them, ships prepared to carry them back to civilization, where technology reigned and survival was automated. But Marcus and his students would remember the lessons learned with nothing but knowledge and a blade, and they would never forget that sometimes the simplest tools, carried by the wisest hands, were worth more than all the complexity the galaxy could offer.